right. Hello, everyone. This is day 31 of this war that we're all following with much concern and trepidation. You know that this has been the worst attack in a century, or at least since the Holocaust, certainly in Israel. It is, we've never seen anything like this. So in that sense, it's transformative, and so will Israel's response be. We've all learned the hard way that if they can do it, they will do it. So we're in a new era, a new Israeli security concept. The challenges, of course, is that there's a diplomatic clock, or so we're told. We hear a lot about domestic pressures in the United States, especially from the progressive camp. And I think we all understand that Israel will need an international coalition of various countries, certainly democracies, certainly those in Europe that stand up with us to continue this fight until Hamas is destroyed, until the people of Israel can live peacefully and safely, both in the north and the south. You see that today the north is heating up again, and I'm sure Shimrit will have a lot to say about that in a few minutes. I think we all understand what's at stake. There's absolutely no choice but to continue to do this. And in order to be successful, the IDF will need the time that is necessary to complete this mission. And here, the European countries, and I need to point out just one or two leaders for all of us to know and remember. The Czech defense minister that threatened to leave the United Nations because of the cynicism that they were hearing there, just like we were hearing there. And the German vice chancellor from the Green Party, who this week gave a speech against anti-Semitism, against Hamas, in support of Israel, like we've probably never heard before. And I urge all of you to take that speech and to send it to your colleagues and also to university presidents here in the United States, because it's an example of moral clarity that we need in order to achieve this, complete this mission. ELNET has been working around the clock, all of our offices around the world. This is our fourth delegation in Israel right now in 4 weeks. 16 members of parliament from multiple countries that right now are in the south, meeting with members of families of hostages and bereaved and members of the south. Very, very important to make sure that European leaders withstand the pressure and stand up with Israel, both for now and for the day after in Gaza, and also the day after in Israel. Europe is Israel's largest trade partner. Israel is going to need these economic relationships and diplomatic and political goodwill for many, many years to come. So if there was ever a moment for ELNET, this is that moment. And we thank all of you for being here to support us and to support leaders, Israeli leaders like Shimrit Meir, who will speak to us in a few minutes. This is critical for our future, for Israel's future, and the future of the Jewish people, because these European countries are fighting anti-Semitism day in and day out, as you're probably all reading. So without further ado, Daniel, the floor is yours. Please stay with us, everyone, for the coming hour. Daniel, please.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, David. It's good to see such big turnout despite the dire circumstances. Before I introduce our topic and speaker, I wish to express to all of you who have joined us today my personal gratitude. We have been doing these briefings for a while now, and it's more than ever important for us both as a country, but also as individuals, to tell our story, our side of the story, and have someone on the other side listen and support. Some of you have been long-term supporters and participants, and some have joined us in these past weeks. But regardless of the nature of the support you give us at ELNET, it means the world that you are here to listen and ask the relevant questions to our guests. So to understand better what happened on October 7th and what is currently the situation here on the ground. Our mission at ELNET is to educate and build bridges. And I take it upon myself as well to continue doing so for the organization, but most importantly for my close ones and my country as a whole. During these times, Israel needs, as David mentioned, international support and understanding to allow time for the IDF in its effort to bring their hostages to their families and to keep our borders safe. We are seeing the conversation changing and the pressure rise from the streets, and it's with your help that we can continue in these efforts to secure our borders and bring back our citizens. We see unprecedented support from European governments, and we're going to discuss this, but we also see a surge in anti-Semitism and mass anti-Israeli protests in Europe. I've just come back from the delegation in the south, We have seen the atrocities, and Israel here, we are still counting our dead, but the international community is starting to forget what crimes against humanity have started this war on October 7th. At a meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu, French President Emmanuel Macron proposed to create a regional and international coalitions to eradicate Hamas, and announced an international summit, a humanitarian summit for Gaza, to be held this week in Paris. Germany has banned Hamas from its territory and other terror-related organizations, and the UK has shown unprecedented support for Israel. Is this international coalition a viable proposition? Can the lessons learned from the anti-ISIS coalition that has been done by the West and NATO can be applied here in Israel as the war continues now? To address these issues, freshly back from our high-level discussions and ELNET's first ever E3 strategic dialogue in London, we have with us Shimrit Meir, who will share her insights on the paradigm shift since the war began on October 7th, and how unprecedented European show of support and how the narrative is changing. Shimrit Meir was the senior advisor to the Prime Minister of Israel, Naftali Bennett, helping design and execute the Prime Minister's foreign national security policy. In this role, she managed the day-to-day relations and strategic discussions with the White House, as well as many European and Arab administrations. She also advised on strategy, communications, and geo-economic affairs. And she's also one of Israel's leading Middle East experts. So let's begin. Shimrit, what were the key developments in Israel's leadership and society after October 7th? Let's start with that date. When the Israeli government has now been repeating in the IDF generals as well, what was before October 7th is not what's going to be in the future. What is the implications of that statement?
First of all, Daniel, good to be with you and good to be with ELNET, and thank you for hosting me. And I have to say, looking at your work, the organization's work throughout this horrible month, from the very first hours after October, on October 7th, and now in European capitals and on the ground in Israel, I'm proud to be a part of this effort, and I really appreciate it, and I think many in Israel really appreciate it, and many of our European friends find it a home at the moment. So thank you for that. I think that's a very important question that you're asking about. Things can never be the same. I think the answer has several layers. There is the profound layer, and I want to start with it because, in my opinion, it is the most important one. The moment I got to Israel after October 7th, the first flight I could go on, because, as you know, as opposed to normal places or war zones, the movement was towards Israel. Every Israeli that could help rushed back home, and there was a shortage in places on flights, and everyone was hurrying to help, whether it's in the army or elsewhere. So the moment I got there and landed, through all this shock and trying to absorb both mentally and emotionally the information, the one thing that you can sense on people's faces is that this is something that we've never experienced before. Not only did we never experience before, we could never imagine that this is possible. Our premise, the way we grew up, the way we conducted our affairs, both on a national security level, but on a personal commitment to our country, was never again. The atrocities and vulnerability of our most vulnerable ones from 8 decades ago can never be repeated. It just can never be repeated because we won't let it happen. Well, it did happen. To an extent, and this was something that I think shattered every Israeli to the core. So that's one layer, and I think we're going to see the implication of it later after the war. The second thing, and I think it's kind of internalizing the nature of the neighborhood that we live in, and kind of dismantling of some of the organizing principles, especially towards Gaza. Understanding that this is not about the economy. This is not about the so-called quote-unquote siege on Gaza. Because if this was the case, then the trajectory was very good in regards to Hamas. Israel for years and years did everything, many governments, to try and work with it, try to solve it. Several weeks before the attack, there were talks about a seaport in Gaza exploration projects in Gaza, not to mention the Qatari money and the workers, etc., etc. So we got a glimpse of one day of full-on attack on our towns and villages, of what could happen if this so popular slogan of from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, if they will get more than one day, what will happen? So I think in that sense, every Israeli that you will find is, at the moment, underwent, first of all, a trauma and trying to make sense out of the reality. In terms of our national security and in terms of how we conduct our relations with our surroundings, I think this will shift our doctrine to a large extent. We will have to rethink about our strategy, about what went wrong, about how the army operates, about our cooperation with other players, and on the political level, regardless of this or that, the one thing that I keep on hearing is very, very talented, devoted, resourceful people. The people that you see now, the civil society, that takes the place of the government in many places, that contributes, that volunteers, that takes responsibility, these people will no longer stay outside of the political arena. They will have to be a part of the political arena and not leave the leadership to the less competent. And I think we're going to see the day after, of course, it's too early. We are going to see a different Israel in many ways.
So before we get to the day after, and we'll discuss it as well, and especially politically, the Israeli government now, in terms of strategy, as you mentioned, aims in order to end the situation to eliminate Hamas. And it's not a war against, obviously, the Palestinians, as it's been said, but it's a war against Hamas. Can this be achieved? Hamas is an ideology. We've seen it with ISIS as well, but what strategies now in Gaza or even in the West Bank, but how can you defeat Hamas?
Well, you have a point here. Hamas is an ideology, and it is, but I have to say, the idea of Islam as a political solution, the idea of armed struggle, of violence as against civilians as a legitimate tool, of extreme enforcement of Islamic law on the population. These ideas are Hamas's ideas, but ideas were defeated in the past and can be defeated in the future. Hamas is not only an idea. Hamas is part of two important Middle Eastern or regional networks. The one network is the Muslim Brotherhood. So you can see the ties to Qatar, that is a patron of the Muslim Brotherhood, and to Turkey, that is a patron of and the entire infrastructure of the Muslim Brotherhood in the region, in Egypt, in Jordan, in other places. The second network is the Iranian Revolutionary Guard network. And you can see it, you can feel it in Israel as we speak. Hamas does not fight alone. We are experiencing rockets from Lebanon, controlled by Hezbollah. We are experiencing the Americans, rockets from Yemen, of all places. Do we have anything to do with Yemen? No, they are part of the network. From Iraq. This is all conducted from one HQ in Tehran. And to be more specific, the Quds Force that belongs to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. They are conducting this orchestra. So the question is, Hamas has many layers. Can you defeat all the layers? If you have to, you will. But I want to focus on the objectives of this very campaign that is taking place now in Gaza. Israel needs two things urgently. And I would even say that it will be easier to express it in a simple way. First of all, we have hostages. More than 200 hostages in Gaza, including little kids that are in the hands of the people that we know for a fact to be rapists and sadists and very, very violent people in Gaza. So we have to get our people back one way or another. The second thing is, when you say eliminate Hamas, Israel has to make sure that October 7th can no longer be repeated. Now, I say that because Hamas's leadership, including people that used to be on the more moderate side, like Ghazi Hamid, when asked, if you will get a chance, will you repeat it? And he say, of course, we will repeat it. Israel has to dismantle their capability to conduct more attacks against it, whether it is their leadership that should be taken out, Yahya Sinwar and Mohammed Def and all the fellows, and its missile capability that paralyzes our day-to-day life. This is, needless to say, a long, complicated campaign. There is a reason why we didn't do that thus far. But when you say eliminate Hamas, I want to make sure that, and this is why I don't think this is the best term.
Okay.
This is by no means eliminating Gaza or targeting civilians in Gaza. Israel is abiding throughout this entire campaign by international law. Again, we are dealing with a terrorist organization that shamelessly and openly conducts its business from within civilian population. So it is extremely hard to execute, but Hamas has to be disarmed and dismantled before we can move on with our lives.
So, as you said, Hamas is part of a network. And there's several layers to it. There's the layer that you said as an ideology, but also as an organization. But as it is part of a network, we heard, as I said earlier, Macron suggest an international coalition. Will a European or an international coalition to dismantle the capabilities of such an organization is something that you think is a viable solution? As Hamas is part of a network that is now destabilizing the whole region, from both Syria, Lebanon, and of course Iran, is it something that the West can do together? We know Israel usually is known to act alone and to not ask for help and to solve its issues by itself, but is it something that we should aim for?
First of all, I think the mere suggestion is important. And I know that we all are very consumed with everything that's going on campuses, demonstrations on the street, anti-Semitic attacks, the level of hatred that you see, the voices from the extreme left with some elements in the Muslim communities, etc., etc. And of course, what's going on social media, which is completely unhinged. But I do want to look at the important bricks here in the war, which is the American administration and the British administration and the French administration and the Italian one understand. They all understand what happened on October 7th. And they can tell good from bad. They can tell right from wrong, and criminals from people who defend themselves. And I think that when I say government represent normally the majority of population. So I don't think we should be confused and just assume that all Europeans are, or the majority of Americans. No, this is not the case. We have a problem with a big minority, a very vocal minority with many ways to express themselves and resources, but nonetheless a minority. I think the majority in the Western Hemisphere understands that this is this could have been them. They could have been dancing at the party or just sleeping at home in a holiday with their babies. And so I do think that people understand how Europe can help now, or the sane part of Europe can help. I would say, and I know, and I will get to the more strategic or geo-strategic elements, but I think the most important thing is to speak up. We are dealing with people that have amplifiers. For example, just one example, which is extremely important, TikTok algorithm. The algorithm of TikTok that shifts opinion among young demographic in the West. Speak up. Don't feel, and I know that sometimes, and I know it from myself many times, the level of bullying that you sometimes experience when you speak up and when you allow yourself to express an opinion that is more nuanced, and that you allow yourself to maybe withdraw from the circle that you usually surround yourself with. And I know that especially in universities and in liberal elite clubs or circles. And I'm not saying this I'm just saying it is difficult. So I do think that it is important to empower people to speak up, to not forget what happened, who started it. We did not start it. On the contrary, the Israeli government is being scrutinized now for just, preferring not to act in advance. We maintained the ceasefire as long as we could have maintained the ceasefire and more. So I do think this is important. Second thing is, the moral support is very important, and I do think empowering the government to continue to support Israel is very important. Second thing is, as I said, Hamas is not alone. Hamas operates within a network. Hamas needs money. Half of the budget of Al-Qassam Brigade, its military wing, comes from the IRGC, from Iran. Hamas's political leadership sits in 5-star hotel in Doha, Qatar. There are many things that a European country can do in order to push the player and make them understand that this is not a good gamble, the gamble on Hamas, or at least make them pay a price for it. So that's the second thing. The third thing I think is happening already, which is the support, whether it's military intel, exercises, etc., that is happening on the ground, whether through direct cooperation between the armies, through NATO, through other vehicles.
Yeah, so you mentioned Qatar, and I think a lot of people in the European community, or even let's say the larger public, we're not necessarily aware how connected Qatar and Hamas are. And now we've seen, as you mentioned, there are over 200, I think 242 is the updated number, hostages within Gaza. What is Qatar's role in all of this, and how can there are conversations also with European governments, also the U.S. administration, obviously. What's Qatar's got to do with all of that?
So Qatar has a very, very wise way to conduct its business, and this is what made her from an insignificant small country in the Gulf to a strategic player on the world stage, which is, to put it very simply and maybe simplistically, they create a problem and then they help solve it. The same way they hyped up Al-Qaeda, before and after September 11th. And they are, through their propaganda machine, Al Jazeera, both in Arabic and in English, push this messaging and anti-American, anti-Israeli messaging day in, day out, full of hate, full of incitement. They inspired this. They give Hamas the home. And then, because they also an American ally and they host an American base, etc., etc., and they have the they have the connections and they have the influence on Hamas, on Al Qaeda. They are indisposable. They are needed in order to solve problems. For example, hostages. So the Americans keep on using them in hostages cases, such as in Afghanistan, etc. For Israel, it was more tricky than that because, as I said, not many in the world were ready to pay for Gaza or to help Gaza financially, because Gaza is being ruled by a terrorist organization, and no country in its right mind would help financially support a terrorist organization. But Qatar agreed to do this. And this is why Israel used it. At the moment, to cut to this moment, the hostages are a real issue that should be solved. And I think many are trying to find the exact channel that will be efficient. And I think the Qatari is the most obvious channel. This is, for example, why Israel refrained from closing down Al Jazeera offices in Jerusalem. Because we understand that the Qataris could play a role, even if there is any chance that they will play a role that will save one Israeli kid's life, then that's a consideration. However, I do think that this all will come down to what Hamas feels that it's worth for him to do it at a certain moment. If he can use the hostages as the human shield, they will. If they can negotiate a ceasefire or humanitarian ceasefire, even for a short while, and they will bargain and they will use it. So I'm not sure that the middleman is that important. We could use the Egyptians, we could use the Turks and others. I do feel that at the moment, to explore and exhaust all possibilities, there is a sense of need of Qatar, both from the Americans and the Israelis. And that's the situation. It's not ideal, but it is what it is.
So if I take two things from what you've just said, as you said, at the end, Hamas will act according to its interests. And we said that Qatar is also financing and helping Hamas stay alive. But we also know that there's a lot of calls and there's a lot of support from European countries that are financing and giving a lot of aid to Gaza, to the Palestinians. But as we know, is being taken by Hamas. How could you advise, for example, to certain European countries or even the EU itself? How do we solve the situation where Hamas acts obviously independently? It's been giving funds, but they're obviously not using it for the Palestinians in Gaza.
I'm not sure there is a good solution. I don't think that there is. I think one of the challenges, if we are going to see more demands to a humanitarian pause, to make sure that there is a direct channel of the aid to the population. I do think that the UN agencies, in many cases, at least to an extent, are either close to Hamas or controlled by Hamas by force. And we know, and the IDF even did several cases, exposed a raw intel material showing how they confiscate electricity, for example, or fuel from hospital, and how the hospital managers are just, they have nothing to do about it. So I do think that this is tricky. There is a problem. There is a humanitarian, urgent humanitarian needs in Gaza, but I do feel that this is the just the entire complexity lies at the moment in the hospitals in Gaza. Because what do you do if you know that you know for a fact that Hamas or hosts its leadership and fire rockets from surroundings of hospitals? This is how they operate.
Right.
What do you do? So what the IDF has been doing for weeks is calling the population to evacuate the hospital, suggesting alternatives in the southern part of Gaza, evacuate the hospitals. But Hamas wouldn't let them. They wouldn't let them. So there are some real dilemmas. I'm not saying they are simple, but I do think that when, if the end result or the end story on the news is Israel targets hospital, I think that we need to remember what's going on in this hospital, and that Israel, time and time again, the IDF spokesperson goes every single day and asks, almost begs the Palestinians to evacuate their hospitals. Yeah, I do think that the aid is very tricky, and I know that people reassure the IDF and the Egyptians that they are looking into the ambulances and the aid that going in and going out, but they facilitated ambulance to go outside of the Gaza Strip through the Rafah crossing of Egypt. So the Israelis demanded to know the names of the people that will be on the hospitals. They were handed to the Egyptian authority. Dozens of them were Hamas activists that they tried to smuggle out. So yeah, I'm just saying it's complicated, and it is important to talk about the complexity, and it's important to talk about the kind of entity that we are dealing with.
If I head our conversation a bit to the north, as we've mentioned a couple of times since the beginning of the call, Hamas is part of a network, an axe, and that is obviously its center is in Tehran, and it has proxies all around the Middle East, and we have Hezbollah in the north. And we had a big, what do you call that? A big upcoming speech. There was a lot of buzz around Nasrallah's speech on Friday. What do you make of that? What's the situation in the north? We've seen also the Israeli administration, some leaks in the media, unverified, of course, that Israel was planning to potentially do a surprise attack, a counter before on Hezbollah, before it enters Gaza. What's the situation now in the north? Will it escalate?
So I do think that we all sat on Friday and anticipated Nasrallah's speech. There was a lot of hype from Hezbollah's kind of media people on Twitter and elsewhere, and video clips and psychological warfare that ended up backfiring them because the expectations, especially among the Palestinians, were huge. I think they were expecting that that Nasrallah is going to say, yes, Bismillah, we are starting the war, and then the rockets will be fired. This was not the case. I do think that nothing profoundly has changed in Hezbollah's strategy as we see it and can observe it. Hezbollah will not risk a war unless Hamas's very existence as the controller and the entity that runs Gaza is jeopardized. If Hamas is still on its feet, then they will do what they are doing now, which is slowly and gradually escalating, corresponding with the needs in Gaza. Full-on war is a very, very heavy decision to make, especially when you have all the American deployment here, and especially when the President of the United States say don't. So but I'm not saying they are not going to do that. I'm saying that they will not do it they wouldn't do it because of what they call massacre of civilians. I'll give you an example. The closest journalist to Nasrallah, the editor-in-chief of the Al-Akhbar newspaper, said yesterday, so I've never seen anything so smug in my life. He said in an interview in the Lebanese TV. So the journalist asked him, what about the innocent lives in Gaza? And he said, you know what? As we speak, there are 50,000 pregnant women in Gaza. In no time, by the time they end the war, we will have compensated for the people dead. You know, the subtext was, leave me alone with the innocent in Gaza. They will act on when they feel that a strategic asset of theirs, i.e. their stronghold in Palestine, which is Hamas in Gaza, is going to be wiped out. Because we are living in historic time, unfortunately. And if the adventure of October 7th will end up in a huge defeat, this will be, to their camp, this will be an historic defeat that will deter them from and will make them pay a public price as well. So I do feel that they will, when they will feel that this is close to defeat, they will seriously considering to open the front. But at the moment, what they are doing is gradually escalating. Of course, this can deteriorate because at the moment, this is up to Israel. If they're firing rockets, including direct hits on buildings, and Israel has every single time, which is several times a day, a dilemma. And Israel chooses to contain it because at the moment, the focus is Gaza, and you don't want full-on war in two fronts. But it can change. As I say, it's very dynamic, and there is a great deal of gamble here and room for miscalculation.
So let me rephrase and tackle this question from another angle, and I would love your insight on it. As we know, obviously, Hamas and Hezbollah are proxies of Iran. And many analysts call them their second strike capability. If something happens in Tehran, they have people on the border of Israel in order to strike back. And we've seen the US bringing, obviously, the aircraft carriers and submarines we've seen yesterday to deter such an attack or such a preemptive strike. Does that change Hezbollah's calculations? Because if one proxy is down, but at least we have one strong one to maintain, if there were something to happen within Iran.
So I'm going to be completely honest. Hezbollah's analysis as of yesterday was that Hamas is still fighting and still on its feet. They don't see the situation as Hamas is about to collapse any moment, unfortunately. This is not how they see it. And they claim that they are in direct touch with Hamas's military leadership and they have a joint war room together. So that's their analysis. And another important date, which is 5 days from now, 11/11, Nasrallah has another speech. It's the Martyrs' Day, Yom el-Shahid. And they kind of set the clock because I think they sense the disappointment and how they are being perceived now in the Arab world. What they want to achieve is a ceasefire. Because ceasefire, and I think it's worth making clarifying this point. When you say ceasefire, it sounds reasonable. There is a war, we want ceasefire. Ceasefire is Hamas's strategic goal. Why? Because if there is a ceasefire now, they won the war. They launched the first attack. They started the war. Their achievement from their perspective was unprecedented since 1948. Israel retaliated, but then withdrew, and there's a ceasefire. And they will get something for the hostages. The ceasefire means at the moment, and that's even Bernie Sanders said that ceasefire at the moment is a gift to Hamas. What Nasrallah wants to do he wants to see, and this is what they are saying in these very words, he wants to see some kind of a humanitarian pause by Saturday. And what they are, assuming is that a humanitarian pause will lead to further ceasefire or negotiations, etc., etc. So I think everything is very, very fragile. Do I think that the Iranian regime wants to sacrifice Hezbollah? No. Are they careless? No. I think it's important to note that Nasrallah said that he wasn't part of the decision-making of Hamas choosing the date. By the way, important things, something that is just unbelievable. He described, Hamas chose the date because of the Jewish holiday. Jewish holiday, first of all, people have a day off, they go to a party, and then Jewish holiday, the army is not quite, functioning the way it is. It is Sukkot, people usually take a long holiday. People are in a holiday. It's like the Christmas vacation in the West. And he described it as awesome. This is how he said. Their timing was awesome, I have to say this. And several sentences afterwards, it went on and on about Israel targeting churches and mosques. So, which is not true, but nonetheless, goes to show you that we are fighting in a war when the other side has zero rules. Zero rules.
Incredible. Yeah. So you talked about a ceasefire as the strategic goal of Hamas, but ceasefire or not, obviously we don't know, we can't predict the future about how this will end, but everybody's asking the question about the day after. What next? What's the big question mark on the West Bank and the Palestinian territories? What's with the Palestinian Authority? So far, the West Bank has been somewhat quiet. Is the two-state solution still something that we can talk about? Is it something that now is completely out of the table, or is it now a completely different two-state solution? Is there something to talk about now since 7th of October?
I want, there are some unrealistic expectations, and I will say, and this will be brutally honest. There is a reason, one thing that Israelis keep on asking, not just Israelis, how did you let the situation get to this point? How did you allow Hamas to continue to control Gaza for so many years? The answer to this question is partly because there was no other convincing alternative. And I'm not sure there is now. I know that there is some kind of fantasy that the PA will take over Gaza and will rule it, and will unify the Palestinian territory, and this will be maybe the first phase of a political negotiations between the two sides, etc., etc. However, I don't think this is very feasible. I do think that the Americans now heard from the PA that they are not interested in so many ways. I'm not sure that even if they are interested, they are capable. They are not really capable to block Hamas on the West Bank without the Israeli military presence. So I think that's a bit. I'm not sure this corresponds with reality. Again, there is the question of legitimacy. I'm not sure Abbas would want to enter Gaza courtesy of the IDF. Is not very legitimate and popular as it is, and I'm putting it very, very, very mildly.
We've seen what happened last time they tried to control Gaza. Yes,
they were thrown from the roofs, etc. So there is that. I know that there are some. Again, I think this is very far-fetched. expectations that maybe a conglomerate of Arab countries will take over Gaza and be committed to its day-to-day life. I don't see any volunteers. Why would they want to? Why
So
would anyone?
let me take that and ask you, as a regional and conglomerate, as you said, but just before that war, there was a wave of agreements and peace in the Middle East, the Abraham Accords. We were just about, allegedly, to sign an accord with like a normalization with Saudi Arabia. Can the Abraham Accords be leveraged to the day after, or have the Abraham Accords been completely damaged now? Is normalization with Saudi? Can this be part of the solution?
I think it's yet to be seen. It's very early on. I don't think what's going on now is helping. I think I'm stating the obvious now. The public opinion in the Arab world was kind of uninterested in Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which was a great thing that allowed us to get to many good places. Is now very much mobilized. It'll be very hard for an Arab leader to, right after this, to cut a deal with Israel. I don't think anything is impossible, but especially if there is some kind of Palestinian component. But I do think this is far-fetched. I do think that, and I'm here speaking personally, I think the number one and only priority of the Israeli government at the moment should be to restore security. That's A, B, and C, just to restore security and deterrence. And no other calculations should be on the table at the moment. Because the profound reason why we reached to the stage of normalization with the UAE, with Bahrain, all the progress that we've made with Saudi Arabia is because we were able to project power. If we are not able to project power, and power doesn't mean being aggressive, power means being basically able to defend your citizens and to be safe in the extremely violent neighborhood that we live in. I think that should be the priority. And if we are going to fulfill this priority, then things will fall into place in the right time.
So as I'm going through the questions that we've received from our audience, one of them fits right into what you just said. How does Israel now avoid being played into a pause or a ceasefire that brings us back to where we were on the 6th of October? Where Hamas still is in Gaza and Hezbollah is still a threat in the north, and we're back to square one?
I think that's very complicated, and I do think that public opinion is a great player here. And I'm not saying this. I'm saying this as someone who was in government and understands, I think, firsthand the interaction between public opinion and how decisions are being made on a political level. And I will explain. The U.S. administration does not seek ceasefire. At least that's what they are saying out loud. They do not seek ceasefire. They understand the meaning of a ceasefire at the moment. What they are after is some kind of a humanitarian pause. I do think that is, and there are many faces and shapes that this can happen. I do think that this is important, that the public discourse will reflect the fact that the ceasefire at the moment is a victory to Hamas. I think that when the entire conversation has been taken over by the anti-Israeli voice, is not a healthy situation. And when the administration is constantly having to defend itself instead of being empowered from public opinion, I think that's a problem. The same thing goes to the ability of the Israeli administration and government to have a fruitful conversation with the US, given the fact that they were extremely supportive supportive to an extent that is really unbelievable, the Biden administration, right from day one. And I don't think there is any Israeli that is not grateful to President Biden for what he has done. I do think that the ability to conduct an intimate conversation with the Biden administration and to go back and forth and to try to accommodate to their worries and needs on the humanitarian front and to buy us more time, it's important. I think that in terms of public opinion in Israel, I don't think there is I don't think that will fly a ceasefire at the moment. There should be an achievement, a military achievement, a proof that Hamas is not in the same place it was a month ago. I think we are yet to see this kind of proof.
And is a proof like that would be liberating the hostages, for example, if there's an international pressure on either through Qatar from the Europeans, because the leadership is sitting there, or to let's say like to make the humanitarian aids limited unless you liberate hostages, and then you see that Hamas is not in the same place anymore.
I would advise the Israeli government to tie things together, because if you are talking about humanitarian aid, which is very important, as long as we are making sure that it goes to the people who need it and not, enforcing Hamas and helping Hamas. But the Red Cross should at least be able to see the hostages. We are talking about children. We are talking about, I've heard stories about people that are disabled, that are sick and that are chronically ill, for example, and don't have the medicine and don't have the medical. We are talking about people that are horrified, that have been through hell and back. So I do think that these should be tied together, humanitarian for humanitarian. That's A, and B. I'm afraid that I can't see a situation when there is, let's say, 5-day pause. This is what they are talking about now.
Right, yeah.
And after the 5-day pause that Hamas desperately needs, we are conducting the war from the place that it stopped. This is not how it goes. If you want a humanitarian pause, you want an interlude to a ceasefire. So I think these are very crucial moments, and I think that the least one can ask from Hamas and from the mediators is that they should, if they want a humanitarian pause, they should pay for this humanitarian pause with releasing. Yeah.
Another question we've received is more of the strategic capability of Israel. What is the tipping point of Israel in terms of multiple simultaneous attack, multiple fronts, all of what Israel is so afraid of? Where do we, because we also seen it in the conversation within Israel. Are we fighting for our existence in the similar conversation as in 1973, or is it different now?
So I wouldn't say that Israel is so afraid of. I think. Let me be completely frank about this. If you have the alternative of exhausting one war against a very, very vicious, determined enemy in the south without having to deal with his older, more vicious brother up north, then you want to do that. You want to exhaust it. The question is, can you? Israel has deployed its forces in a way that still the majority of some capabilities is deployed up north. A, to deter Hezbollah, and B, to be able to fight if they are going to attack. Hezbollah's war plan is to an extent, or some of it is based on surprises, just like Hamas surprised us. this moment, I don't think they can surprise us. Maybe I'm wrong, but everyone is very, very alarmed up north. They are right in one thing when they say this is not 2006, i.e., if Israel is going to threaten to destroy the Dahya, i.e., the southern parts of Beirut, Hezbollah's hub, then we are going to destroy Israeli cities. I do think that in that sense, the American presence with the air defense systems and other, I think should send them a message, because if we are stretched in terms of, let's say, our air defense capabilities, we are less stretched than what we could have been without the American back. So nobody wants to fight two wars. To be completely honest, nobody in Israel wanted to fight one war. This was not our choice. I see that Israel, if you follow closely how the IDF is conducting itself up north, it retaliates in a very measured way. The message is we do not want it to become a war, but if you are going to launch a war, then there will be war. So I do think that, and there is another element, that Israel evacuated not only residents from the south, it evacuated people from the north as well. And at the moment, when time has come and these people have to go back home, they need to be sure that their faith is not going to be like their brothers and sisters that were raped and slaughtered in the south, and that Hezbollah's terrorists not going to use the same methods that Hamas terrorists use. So I think that these are very crucial days, but and I don't think anyone in Israel is interested in another front, but I do think that if we have to fight this fight, we will fight this fight.
And we will stay here. On this note, and the hour has already almost finished. I want to thank you personally for this conversation. It has been very interesting, and thank you for joining us here, both here and in London for our strategic dialogue most recently.